Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. Another huge day in the championship. All three contenders still very much so in the fight. Oscar Piastri continues his resurgence with another phenomenal qualifying performance. Lando with a key mistake at a crucial time, costing him the chance to end up on pole position. But Max is once again right back in the mix and recognises that after what happened today in the sprint, he absolutely needs to do something in turn 1 tomorrow if he's going to have any chance. And maybe he is going to pull out absolutely all the stops to make that happen. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you're new as always. We're going to start here with Yuki Tsunoda, because yesterday was very strong, today in the sprint was also very strong. Marco says he's not just strong here, he was competitive in this level in Vegas before he messed up the tyre pressures. The sprint again went pretty well for him. Qualifying, however, went a different way. It appears they made some changes to his car. That might be something we discuss in more detail in the coming days. There is a rumour that he will go. There's also a rumour that he will stay. So it looks like it's going to be Max and Hadjar next year at Red Bull, right? That's almost guaranteed. The question is, does Yuki stay around in the B team? Do they keep him in Racing Bulls? It's likely they are going to promote Arvid Lindblad. I think that's actually now almost a guarantee. The question then becomes, do they keep Liam Lawson or do they put Yuki Tsunoda back down? Now, you might argue, what's the point of putting Yuki back down? Because, you know, he's never going to get promoted again. He had his chance and it didn't go to plan for various reasons, so now it's time to go. But I think you could also make the same argument with Liam Lawson as well. Okay, his chance was shorter. He got 2 Grand Prix. But I don't think Lawson's done anything especially spectacular this season either. So I think you can debate either way, whether you keep Yuki in the B team or whether you bring Lawson back for another year effectively. Now, the rumour is that Honda are still getting involved here. Now, Honda are leaving for Aston Martin, but they're still involved with Yuki. They've been involved with Red Bull for some time. It's better for Honda, it seems, to have Yuki, a Japanese driver, affiliated with them on the grids than to have Lawson, even though they're now getting into bed with Aston Martin. And Red Bull are doing their own thing. But according to reports, there will be an extensive TPC, testing previous cars program, for Lindblad's preparations, and that will all be done with, Honda power units. So Honda will say, well, they don't have to do that, but they probably should, and they will come to good terms there. So if Red Bull are kind of undecided between Lawson or Tsunoda who makes the most sense to keep, then there's an argument that Honda will say, look, if you put Yuki in the car, we'll give you good terms for this development program for Lindblad, and everybody wins. Because if Red Bull don't really mind either way. So that was the report yesterday, and then today there's further reporting that says, yes, actually these negotiations are happening. They're at a fairly advanced stage. So there's apparently the most likely scenario is that Yuki stays, but alongside Lindblad at Racing Bulls, with Hadjar getting the promotion. So apparently, according to some, that is now more likely than it being Lawson and Lindblad. So it looks like it could go either way on this one. I'd like to see Yuki get another shot, I think. But look, I'm not really sure that either driver, whoever gets kicked out, Lawson or Tsunoda, it will be like, you know what, fair enough, it can be justified. Now, speaking of Red Bull, this was Max's. He actually picked up some damage here when he went off in qualifying yesterday. The car was definitely in a better spot today, but still just not quite quick enough compared to the mighty McLarens. But the most interesting thing that may happen in tomorrow's race, apart from turn 1, could well be punctures. Now, it was noted after qualifying yesterday, and presumably after the sprint as well today, that some of the tyres had cuts on the tread. All of the corners are affected. This is mainly due to the gravel traps we have. Pirelli say they're not so concerned about it, but it is nonetheless something that they're keeping an eye on. Now, this is what the gravel looks like around Qatar. So, these are not nicely polished round stones. These are sharp weapons that you might see a caveman wield, shall we say, in combat. So that's what they've got around the side of the track. That is causing issues for the tyres. Now, in qualifying, it's even maybe more of an issue because more drivers are pushing, they're going off the track, they're bringing gravel onto the track. and then if the tyres are running over that consistently, then you could get some punctures. In addition to the fact that the curbs are very abrasive around Qatar, and the FIA has already mandated a 25 lap limit on any compound or any tyre set because they fear that they will structurally come apart effectively, not even puncture. They will just break apart at the seams because of the vibrations, and then you add on to that problem the degradation itself and this gravel, and you start to realise that we could have something happen tomorrow, because the sprint today, well, nothing happened at all. Now, you also might be wondering, why have we got bouncing back? Why is porpoising back? Why is it a problem? Why is everyone talking about this again? And De Kester does an interesting article on it here that effectively the flexi wing was the antidote to these issues. They're trying to chase that very last tenth of performance, and when they do so, if they run the car too low, they might get disqualified. If they run it slightly too high, they might trigger some porpoising, which again causes some plank wear, as we saw for McLaren back in Las Vegas. So since the flexi wing was banned earlier this season, some teams have still tried to find ways around it, but effectively, in this entire era of regulations, the existence of the flexi wing allows the cars to be set up on a better balance window where they actually didn't have to massively compromise. But now that's been banned again, they do. I think personally it's just a flaw of these regulations that it doesn't seem like there is a perfect solution without the flexi wing being allowed, as it was, as I say, banned earlier on. So that's why we're seeing this bouncing return. It's affected McLaren. It was affecting Max, of course, as well, as we know. Speaking of Max, we know that there's interest from Aston Martin to get their hands on him over the next couple of years. Adrian Newey actually gave some comments on the fact that he's going to become team principal. Basically what he said was, not much is going to change. He's going to try and not be involved as much as he possibly can in any of the media duties and the sponsor stuff. He thinks things will effectively stay the same. Andy Cowell went to go and deal with the engine integration with Honda and everything, and he said, look, I was going to go to the first few races anyway. I offered to be team principal to make it work. But it struck me when he spoke that he doesn't really intend to be team principal in the way that there are other team principals on the grid in a longer term capacity. That's why there have been continual discussions about Christian Horner, but apparently Lance Stroll has told the Aston Martin staff that that's not part of their plans. But of course, that could change in due course. I wouldn't be massively surprised. This was Max's car actually after yesterday's damage that he suffered. So of course they got a new floor in his car today and a couple of setup changes at that. And then we got into the sprint. So I'll go through the sprint, then we'll talk about qualifying because, well, I mean, what to say about the sprint really? You had Lewis Hamilton first of all, and Lance Stroll, both of the Alpines, starting from the pit lane after a change to their setup. This then was the first corner. Piastri got away well. It was actually Yuki Tsunoda here on the inside who got a really good start. Yuki had the best start of anyone, and maybe he even could have braked very late and tried to take the position on Lando, but if he had have done, that wasn't exactly going to be helping Max. So, Max already got past Alonso into the first corner. I didn't expect Fernando would put up too much of a fight, to be honest, which he really didn't, and Tsunoda then got out of the way a few corners later. So within the first 3 or 4 corners, it was Piastri, Russell, Lando, and Max Verstappen in the top 4, and that's how it would stay for the entire rest of the race, when pretty much nothing happened at all. This was Charles Leclerc, by the way, off in the background. If you guys have seen, maybe someone will post it on YouTube somewhere, Leclerc's opening lap on board of this, wow, what an experience. That Ferrari genuinely looks like the worst car right now, certainly around this circuit. I know that Brundle said it as well during practice yesterday, that there were some corners where the Ferrari was just the worst car. I think it might be the worst car on the grid. And you could, specifically here this weekend with this setup, it's obviously not overall the worst car. But yeah, what a nightmare. Leclerc's on board that lap, he lost so many places because he was trying to turn in, the car would snap. He was all over the place. The amount of fighting that the Ferrari boys have had to do with that car it's genuinely unbelievable how bad that car is right now and how far it's fallen from towards the start of the year where it was at least somewhat reasonably competitive. Max was still struggling with the bouncing. It was better for sure, but, you know, obviously this was the same setup as sprint qualifying, so it was always going to be in a similar type of window. This was Max again riding low. I don't imagine that plank wear will be a massive factor tomorrow based on what we have seen so far. You know, it's not particularly bumpy. Of course, there are going to be some sparks, but generally it seems like the teams are going to be okay with that. Of course, we'll find out. This was a piece of, I don't know, bargeboard or something flying off a Williams. I don't know what it is about the Williams, but if ever there's like a red flag or a yellow flag or something for debris that's just fallen off a car, it will be a Williams. I don't know what they've made the thing of, but it's made of polystyrene because that Williams falls apart like nothing else. There was one overtake that is worth noting. Alonso went wide at the final corner, then Antonelli got the job done. Now, notably, they reduced the DRS length of the DRS zone by 150, like a significant amount of meters a little while ago. They've not changed that back this year. And I think that was probably a mistake, really. Overtaking during this sprint was practically impossible. Lando was under pressure from Max in the first, Max gave it a decent go, but it felt like Lando kind of had it covered. And from then, everyone was just 2 seconds apart, right? Like Russell dropped back to about 2 seconds behind where Oscar was, which is kind of where the dirty air starts to become not so much of a big deal in race conditions. Lando dropped to 2 seconds back behind Russell as well. So it was just an absolute procession. Like this was Monaco-esque, to be honest, and the circuit again, right? I don't know half the time what I'm looking at. So this corner here, this is turn 10, right? But I could be also convinced that this was also turn 6. Like there's another very similar corner to that. I mean, even like the second last corner, you could maybe think it was that as well. You know, there's no landmarks. There's no way as a viewer. I've watched this circuit a number of times now, and when I see let's say, a view of the circuit, I still have to think to figure out what corner they're actually going through. But anyway, that's just Qatar. I'm sure it's a sensational track to drive, and I'm sure it's great for the motorbikes. But for F1, wow, especially with the dirty air as bad as it is right now, it just doesn't work with these very high downforce, high turbulence cars. This was Yuki on the entry to turn 10, going wide. Now, this must have been so marginal, and I thought they were honestly doing this in qualifying yesterday, and they were doing it in qualifying again today. But if you go wide of this white line on the entry to the corner, you will get a lap time deleted. I don't know if the, let's say, engineers were quite as on it as they should have been on the radio, because, once you get one or two deletions here, you'd think, maybe they were, but you'd think your engineer were like, all right, let's just take a little bit of margin on the entry to turn 10. You're not in threat anyway, because it's impossible to overtake regardless. So Antonelli did the same thing. He got a 5-second penalty. Yuki got a 5-second penalty for this. So they finished in the same order anyway. So it was Piastri, Russell, Norris, Max. Norris nearly got Russell at the end of a couple more laps than he would have done. Russell's tyres were cooked. Again, the tyre preservation for McLaren with these very much so harder compounds is just better than anybody else. It would be a surprise to some degree if tomorrow isn't a McLaren 1-2, but also they can only do 25 laps on a set of tyres. So if it was a one-stop tomorrow, then I think McLaren would walk it. But given it's a mandated two-stop, the teams will be pushing harder. It is possible. But even then, towards the end of the stint, the 19 laps they did on the mediums, Russell and Verstappen were struggling more than Piastri and Norris was. Now, of course, Piastri, he was way out front in clean air anyway, so, take it with a pinch of salt. Lando was in dirty air of George and was still able to look after his tyres relatively well, so I think that will still be an advantage for the McLarens tomorrow. Again, the benefit of the new setup is that at least they can make some sort of changes. This was actually the change of the DRS zone. This was initially the activation point way before the start-finish line. This is now the activation point only just before the start finish line. That makes a big difference in terms of overtaking opportunities. It's a qualifying championship. Now, both of the Ferraris had an absolute stinker. This I thought was hilarious. Hamilton drove out the pits with his new setup that they hoped would fix the car for the sprint, and it was terrible. Even Pierre Gasly, who's been driving an Alpine all year, dead last in the championship, came up to Lewis and said, wow, your car looks so bad. And Hamilton was like, yeah, because it is, basically. So then there was a bit of drama before qualifying. If you guys remember yesterday, Max made some comments about Lando and Oscar and said, well, the only reason why I'm still in the fight is because those guys have messed up. If I had that car, this championship would have been wrapped up a long time ago. Now look, Max might be right in that assessment. Of course, if you're Lando or if you're Oscar, you've got to push back on that. You can't let Max have his own way on and off the track as well. Lando, I thought, a little bit spicy after the sprint, said, I don't even know what you're talking about. Max was giving me a little bit of grief. I didn't even notice him. You know, I thought that was Lando kind of saying that I was never worried about Max's pace during that moment. So, I don't know. Lando, like, he did make the mistake in the final part of qualifying today, but he's at least not made big enough mistakes to be out of the picture, right? Like, he's not had a great couple of days in Qatar, but he was still third and second. And all things considered, that is good enough for his title bid. And I feel like he's just got that little bit of a hard edge on his personality now, which might help him mentally get over the line, but he's certainly under pressure. There's no doubt about that. So Lando then fired back and says he's welcome to say what he likes. He's earned the right. He's got 4 world championships. I've got a lot of respect. That gives a lot of credit in general to that guy. He's achieved an incredible amount. Max generally has a good clue about a lot of things, but there are also a lot of things he doesn't have much of a clue about. It's kind of aggressive. It's that kind of aggressive nature in Max's commentary, just talking nonsense a lot of the time. I think he even equated that to the way that Red Bull do things. Yeah, it's the way that Red Bull do things, just talking nonsense. So, you know, I thought that was pretty spicy from Lando, really, in the circumstances. And then we get into qualifying. So the first thing to note really in Q1 again was the Ferrari was absolutely no better at all. Leclerc was struggling so hard with that car, and Hamilton and Leclerc were just both trying to get it round the lap. But I think it was inevitable, really, that Hamilton was going to go out early from this session. There's clearly so much frustration with that car. Max was immediately happier with the balance, which was a positive note. And Hamilton did do a lap here. With 7 minutes to go, Hamilton went 6th, 3/10 off the lead. But the lead was not Piastri, Norris, Verstappen. The lead was Hadjar Gasly, right? Because the track was ramping up at this point. So Hamilton did a lap which was, you know, respectable and wasn't that long after Charles Leclerc's, but they were both like 3/10 off an Alpine. So whatever they'd done was no better. And Hamilton's last lap also wasn't great. I was also a little bit confused with Hamilton's last run because he was only about 4 seconds on track behind Leclerc. And with what they say is it takes 7 seconds roughly for the dirty air to dissipate. So I don't know why they were running that close. I don't know whether that was Ferrari comms. I don't know if that was Hamilton just getting a bit too trigger happy or whatever. But yeah, Hamilton was only about 4 seconds behind Leclerc on track, and that's absolutely going to cost you at least a couple of tenths over the lap, and that's pretty much what he missed out on in the end. Obviously, another absolute disaster for Hamilton. The last few weekends in terms of qualifying have been atrocious. It is interesting because after the summer break, he was pretty much right there with Leclerc on pace, but the car, you could tell, was moving in the wrong direction, and now the car is just nowhere, and Hamilton's pace has struggled. He's out in Q1 again. Yuki was also out though, and this was a key point because it looked like today was his comeback story, right? His redemption arc, maybe enough to keep him at Red Bull, but yeah, he missed out. Couple of not ideal laps. I think maybe the team will have something to say about that. Again, he wasn't a million miles off in terms of pace, but the grid is very competitive, right? I mean, in terms of Max, he was what, 3/10 off Max? You'd think that would be enough, but not with the way the grid currently is and the strength of some of those other cars. Gasly sneaks into Q2 and then gets into Q3 as well. Colapinto was dead last on this occasion, and Hamilton closes out and says, look, I've still got the faith. And look, you can say all you want, Hamilton's washed up, he's past it and all this. And yeah, is he the driver that he used to be? No. But it's not really the story here. The story here is how Ferrari's car is so bad. Like, that is, I think, the story, because yeah, Hamilton's struggling over the last couple of weekends, sure. But Leclerc is having an equally torrid time, really, given that he's driven that car in the Ferrari for 6 years or so, and he can barely make it go around the corner today. I think Leclerc was, frankly, working miracles to get that thing into Q3, which he did eventually do. Max did a 120.1. It was pretty clear that we were going to smash the track record today. This was Leclerc with a huge moment in. I think this is turn 6, but again, I might be wrong. I mean, like, as I say, this track looks like everything else. Lando then puts in a lap that was actually quite a way off because Piastri had just done a mega lap, a 1:19.6, which is really quick for Q2. But that was a Lando lap on used tyres, and then the lap got deleted for, again, track limits on the entry of turn 10. So that put Lando under a bit of pressure. He did a solid, if, relatively unremarkable, but again, Lando was under a bit of pressure. He had one lap to deliver, and he got the job done. It wasn't spectacular, but it was good enough in the end. That gets him through. As I say, Gasly made it through as well. Leclerc somehow got through, and it was Behrman, Lawson, Hulkenberg, Bortoleto, Albon in various order out of the session. Then we got the moment that I think we'd been waiting for on the Ferrari side of the garage, and that was Charles Leclerc with an absolutely monumental spin. He went for a full 720 pirouette, lost it on the penultimate corner, I'm pretty sure, turn 15, I think it probably would be. And he hits the curb. I mean, look, he was just trying to get through. This is on his new tyres as well. But, wow, what a shocking car that looked like today. I genuinely wanted to watch Leclerc's onboards every single quali lap because it was entertainment. It was comedy and it was entertainment at the same time. Then Lando put in a mega lap. So this was very interesting, actually, because on Lando's first sector, Max was right in front of him, also pushing a little bit. Now, I think Max has been very tactical here. So Red Bull were doing the double cool, or the double preparation lap, and Max found himself on track right ahead of Lando, in position to not impede, but to dirty air impede, And I think that's what happened to Lando here again on this lap. He still did a good sector 1, but it probably wasn't as good as it could have been because Max was a couple of seconds up the road, also himself pushing. There's a lot of gamesmanship going on out there right now, and I think you see it in some of the post-qualifying body language, let's say, between the gentlemen that are fighting for the title. But the rest of Lando's lap was mega. Piastri nearly did just as good of a lap, and they were in a different postcode at this point, really. Piastri was 300ths back. Max was about 3-4 tenths off the pace as well. So it was inevitable it was going to be one of the McLaren boys on pole. There was then a red flag because, again, Williams sent their man out with plastic still wrapped around his tyres. So he got noted for an unsafe release, which, to be fair, it was. Then the final laps come through. So this was the crucial moment because Norris was going out very early. He wanted to get nice early position on the track. Piastri went out much later. And Lando, well, he thought that George was going to attack the lap ahead of him. He eventually didn't. Lando then comes down the start-finish straight and through turn 2 gets a bit of a moment. And he knows at that point that he's not going to be able to continue the lap. It's certainly not going to be good enough for 1:19.4, so he then backs off. But at that point he had, I want to say, about 1:40 left on the clock. So it was possible he could still get to the line in time. Now, it would be difficult because he'd have to push the tyres reasonably hard to get there, at which point they're probably not in the best window going into his actual attempted flying lap, getting the battery back under threat. But it felt like there might have been a chance for Lando to get another lap in. I think there was also an opportunity for him to, let's say, in the final sector, do a bit of dirty air impeding to Oscar Piastri as well. But that didn't matter in the end because Piastri puts in an absolutely mega lap, a 1:19.3, to go a 10th clear of Lando. Verstappen was 3rd. Russell was so close again to making something happen, but he ends up 4th. Antonelli 5th, and pretty much the, Hadjar, Sainz, Alonso, Gasly and Leclerc down from there again. Leclerc was only 10th in the end, behind an Alpine. So arguably Norris bottled his final qualifying lap. At the end of the day, he's still in a perfectly fine position. He just needs to come 3rd every weekend, and he will be the world champion, but that is far easier said than done. This was some of the body language between the guys after the fact. This is the way that it stands. So Lando is 22 points now ahead of Oscar Piastri. Max is 25 points back from Lando, 3 points further behind Oscar. If Lando wins tomorrow, he becomes the world champion no matter what. Max, though, needs to beat Lando. This is why things potentially for turn 1 tomorrow are going to be so interesting, because winning on pace tomorrow for Max is almost out of the question, right? I think he recognizes that he will need something to happen to his rivals up front to keep his, hopes alive, at least of beating Lando for the championship. So Max has got to get very tasty turn 1, right? I'm not exactly sure what he's going to do, but Max surely realizes that if he goes through turn 1 tomorrow and Lando Norris is ahead of him, the chances that he is able to keep his dreams of the championship alive at that point are very slim. Maybe you can make an undercut happen, but it's going to be a two-stop for basically everyone. So strategy-wise, I'm not sure what you can do. What you could do is start on the softs, but maybe the McLaren boys will also have that idea. They'll go soft, medium, medium. That's probably what I would do if I was any of the front runners, and Max therefore may have to play it slightly differently. But Max probably knows that if he comes out of turn 1 tomorrow behind Lando Norris, his championship hopes are probably done. And in the post-qualifying conference, Max has just had this to say. So he was asked, well, you know, what are you going to do turn 1? How important is it to get Lando there rather than get him somewhere else? And Max says straight up, well, if I don't pass him then he's going to score more points than me, right? So Max is, as I just mentioned, very clearly and acutely aware that his only real chance of keeping his championship alive is in turn 1. So, well, what's he going to do, right? Like, what stops is he going to pull out? Because it's also worth noting he's 25 points behind in the championship. If he were to win in Abu Dhabi and Lando was to DNF, then he could still win, of course. But also, that would also be true for Oscar, right? So if Max was to, let's say, crash Lando and both of them out of the race, then obviously that would be terrible for Lando, but also Max would then be, you know, so far behind Oscar, right? Because he's already 3 points back. So if Oscar was to win the race and Lando and Max were to crash out, then Max still wouldn't be able to win the championship because Oscar would then be 28 points ahead. So actually it doesn't matter, right? Like, Max cannot DNF is the point. I mean, obviously, but the idea is that he can't just crash Lando out and take it to Abu Dhabi. That's not how it works. If he's gonna play, so if he's gonna be late on the brakes, let's say, then he's got to make sure that at least he stays in the Grand Prix. Obviously, Piastri just needs to try and win the race. Piastri also knows that if he loses position to Lando, it's the same story there as well. If Piastri wins and Lando's second, third, whatever, then the title goes to Abu Dhabi, but probably just between the two McLaren boys at that point. We know that it's a great circuit for Oscar. That continued to be the case today. So, yeah, turn 1's going to be real interesting. We know that it's a qualifying championship, but you know, even more so than a qualifying championship, it's a turn 1 championship, and something will have to give. But turn 1 is an interesting corner. It's not a massively heavy braking zone. It's not a corner where you can like go for a crazy dive bomb. There are multiple lines, it's very wide, but it's not like a huge heavy braking zone to the point where it gives you loads of opportunities. So yeah, massively intrigued to your thoughts in the comments. Again, very much so the usual suspects. They all delivered to a degree today, but Lando will, you know, be reasonably happy, I think, with the way today has gone, but the pressure is most certainly still there, and Oscar Piastri arguably is the one really piling that pressure on. So hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.